Almost every country in the world has fallen into a debt swamp, and the number of countries that have not is very small. The United States is thought to have exceeded $38 trillion in debt. According to estimates, the European Union is said to owe around $14 trillion. Similarly, Japan is believed to be approaching $9 trillion in debt. Even the world's leading oil-rich country, Saudi Arabia, as well as major export powers like Germany and China, carry a serious debt burden. And the following question immediately comes to mind. If countries that look this powerful are so indebted, then who is the creditor? This is exactly where the real meaning of the question changes. Because debt is not only a burden, it is actually the invisible skeleton upon which the modern world is built. If you follow the trail of this debt swamp far enough back, you encounter some disturbing truths behind almost everything we see. Wars, chaos, crises, booms and collapses, diseases, and recovery processes. Who does the world owe? In fact, not to someone else, it seems it owes itself. But that does not mean everyone enjoys equal rights or fairness. Among the countries stuck in debt, there are winners, and of course, there are those crushed beneath it. Today, the world's total debt is said to have exceeded $315 trillion, roughly 3 to 4 times the global economy. So how did the world get here? You may think the story began with bank cards or the internet, but believe me, it goes much further back. It started in the 1600s. I myself could hardly believe it at first. In 1694, England was at war with France, and its treasury was empty. The king went door to the merchants in the country. They began lending money to the state in exchange for interest guaranteed by future taxes, and that is exactly what happened. To manage and advance this system, the Bank of England was founded. Thus, the state began spending money that did not yet exist, imaginary money. And lenders received a tradable imaginary promise from the state. This was the ancestor of today's government bonds. Then France copied the system, the Netherlands developed it further, and the United States adopted it. As a result, the system called national debt was no longer seen as a failure, but instead was presented as credibility. In the past, kingdoms conquered land for gold and jewels. Now, states issue bonds for interest and imaginary money. The art of war has given way to balance sheets and paper. Today, the so-called debt swamp has become the world's largest export. Every country is now indebted. Banks distribute loans and credit cards, and in reality, we all seem to be both debtors and creditors, and somehow partners in this system. So who holds the other ends of the strings? Let's think through the United States as an example. Of America's roughly $38 trillion of debt, about half is held by investors. A large portion of these are American banks, pension funds, investment funds, insurance companies, and the Federal Reserve. The remaining part is held by foreigners, led mainly by Japan and China, but they still make up a relatively small percentage. So this truth emerges. A large share of America's debt is owed to America itself. The government issues bonds, banks buy them, the central bank prints money and buys them again. The public pays taxes, those taxes pay the interest, and the interest returns to pension funds. The system is set up almost like a closed loop that renews itself where it stands. And this loop is not unique to the United States. It is now valid almost everywhere. Everyone owes everyone else, and everyone holds someone else's debt. Above this structure stand nations with enormous financial power and central banks. They decide who can borrow easily and who must pay a heavy price. When confidence is lost, countries shake, leaders change, and fall. Democracy answers the question, who will govern? Financial markets ask, who will survive? The main actors of this game are, of course, the central banks. When they buy bonds, they print new money. In other words, what we call money is, to a large extent, born from debt. The energy of this system is confidence. As long as investors believe states can pay interest, the wheel keeps turning. But when confidence is damaged, the results are painful, as we saw in Greece, Argentina, and Sri Lanka. Austerity, unemployment, crisis. And in this situation, they fall into the hands of those who serve the strongest capitalist structures. Another important point is this. Some states do not borrow to repay their debts, but to roll them over. Old debts are paid with new debts. The real issue is interest. So debt exists not to be repaid, but to be transferred. That's why the answer to the question, will national debts ever be fully paid off, is, of course not. The real plan is to keep faith in debt alive. If debt were paid off, the most trusted financial instrument would disappear. Money would tighten, deflation and collapse would follow. That's why debt grows constantly, like the heartbeat of capitalism. But not everyone receives an equal share of this system. Interest continually flows upward. It starts with workers, continues through taxpayers, and ends with asset owners. Therefore, as global debt rises, inequality grows. In the end, creditors are not always evil, and debtors are not always innocent. We are all inside this system and gradually becoming its servants. The real problem begins when confidence disappears, and that is what brings the end. Debt is not only a burden today, it actually manages the balance of the system. If that balance breaks, we remember what debt truly is, a promise we never really gave, and an interest that cannot be carried forever.